So, when you think about a country writing its own constitution, what comes to mind? Revolutionaries, fiery debates, a totally fresh start? Well, for India, the world's biggest democracy, the story is way more complicated. Its rulebook wasn't written on a blank slate. Instead, it was shaped in a huge way by a pretty surprising source, its old colonial ruler. And it really makes you wonder, right? How does a nation's rulebook actually get written? Is it always this revolutionary act? Or is it, more often than not, an evolution, something built on the foundations and, yeah, even the scars of what came before? For India, you'll find the answer woven right into its history. The story of its modern government has roots that go back centuries, long before the country was even independent. So let's dig into that. We're going to explore how nearly 200 years of British presence in India actually laid the groundwork for its future democracy in ways you might not expect. Okay, so everything we're talking about really comes to a head on this one date, January 26th, 1950. This is the day the Constitution of India officially came into force, a massive, massive achievement. But to really get how this document was created, we need to go back in time. See, just a few years before that, in 1947, India gained its independence. And bam, all of a sudden this massive new nation with hundreds of millions of people needs a new set of rules, and they need it fast. A group called the Constitution Assembly had actually gotten started on this huge job back in 1946. And here's the absolute core of it, and this is a direct quote from our source material. Various features of the Indian Constitution and polity have their roots in the British rule. So think about that. This wasn't about tossing everything out and starting from scratch. It was about building on a foundation that was already there, one made by the British. So you've got to ask, how on earth did this happen? How does a trading company from halfway across the world end up creating the blueprint for a nation's laws? Well, it's a story of a slow, gradual change. This big change didn't just happen overnight. It was a slow burn, unfolding over 3 really key moments. It all started with traders showing up in 1608, then hit a huge turning point in 1765 when they got real power, and it all climaxed with a full takeover by the British government in 1858. Picture this, it's 1608. The British show up in India, but they're not soldiers or conquerors. Nope. They're merchants, the East India Company, and they've got a royal charter from Queen Elizabeth I that gives them exclusive rights to trade. Their mission was all business, or so it seemed. The real game changer was this one little word, Diwani. In 1765, the company got the Diwani for a few key regions, Bengal, Bihar, and Orissa. This wasn't about buying and selling spices anymore. This gave them the right to collect taxes and run the civil justice system. They were starting to govern. And that was the moment everything, and I mean everything, changed. This is when they stopped being just traders and started becoming rulers. Getting the Diwani meant the company was now a territorial power. They weren't just visitors anymore. They were running the place. This big shift kicked off 2 really distinct phases of British rule that we need to understand. First up, you have the company rule, where it was literally a private corporation in charge. And then came the crown rule, where the British government itself stepped in and took direct control. All right, let's take a closer look at that first phase, the company rule. This was from 1773 to 1858. And yeah, it was a time when a business was effectively running a whole subcontinent. So for almost a century, the East India Company was the government. And during that time, it created the very first systems for administration and law. The courts, the bureaucracy, the ways they collected taxes. All of this would become the foundation for how India would be governed later on. But you can probably guess that this wild situation, a private company ruling over millions of people, was pretty unstable. And something big was about to happen that would bring the whole thing crashing down. That big event pushed the British government to step in and take direct control. And that brings us to the second era, the Crown Rule. So what was it? Well, it was a massive rebellion in 1857, often called the Sepoy Mutiny. It was this huge uprising that totally rocked the company's authority and basically sent a message to London that having a corporation in charge just wasn't working anymore. So right after the mutiny, in 1858, the British Crown basically said, "Okay, company, you're done." They dissolved the East India Company's ruling powers and took over direct responsibility for governing India. It was the start of a whole new era. And this era, the Crown Rule, went on for nearly 90 years, all the way up to India's independence in 1947. This was a time of direct, centralized rule from London, and they didn't get rid of the company's systems, they actually just made them stronger and bigger. So now, with the British rule ending, the stage is set for India to finally shape its own destiny. But, and this is a big but, it's going to use a lot of the tools its former rulers left behind. So when you piece it all together, you can see the clear path, right? It all starts with traders. Those traders turn into rulers. Then the crown takes over and makes that rule official. And finally, when independence comes, a brand new constitution is built on the historical foundation that was laid down over those 2 centuries. When you get down to it, all those systems for government the British set up, they didn't just disappear. They became the blueprint for modern India. I'm talking about things like the parliamentary system, the way the civil service is structured, the legal traditions and the courts. These were the starting points for the people drafting the Constitution for a new, free republic. And all of this leaves you with a really big question to chew on. How much of a nation's identity is something it creates for itself, and how much of it is just an echo of its past, even a colonial one? For India, the answer seems pretty clear. History isn't something you can just escape. It's something you build upon, for better or for worse.